everyone. My name is Fiona Davis. I'm the author of The Lions of Fifth Avenue, and I'm thrilled to be here talking with Kristin Harmel, the author of The Forest of the Vanishing Stars, and thanks to St. Louis County Library. And we are going to chat a bit about our books and especially focusing on Kristin's latest, which is very exciting. And then she'll read a little bit from her book. And I just want to let you know that signed copies of The Forest of Vanishing Stars is available by Left Bank Books.
I did want to thank Left Bank Books. They're always wonderful to work with. You mentioned that we'll have signed book plates there, but we're also going to be doing a fun giveaway for a Forest of Vanishing Stars tote bag. It's a nice tote with I think rope handles. They haven't come in yet, so they'll be in soon. Oh yes, Forest of Vanishing Stars koozies that have a quote from the book that says, "In the times of greatest darkness, the light shines through." So that's from the Forest of Vanishing Stars. They have koozies and bottle opener keychains. So that'll be the prize. And if you order your book from Left Bank Books by July 10th, you'll be entered to win.
And let's get going. So Kristin Harmel is the New York Times bestselling author of more than a dozen novels, including The Book of Lost Names, The Winemaker's Wife, The Room on Rue Amélie, The Sweetness of Forgetting. She's also the co-founder and co-host of the very popular web series Friends and Fiction, and she's based in Orlando, Florida. So welcome, Kristin.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And can I just say what a pleasure it is to be here with you? I think you and I really bonded last summer when our books came out at about the same time. And I consider you a great friend and an author who I love. And I'm just honored that you're here with me. So thank you.
You're welcome. It was just such a joy going through that kind of experience together as we both hit the list with books coming out very close to each other. It was really, really wonderful.
It was.
And so, so last year you hit it out of the park with The Book of Lost Names. It was an instant New York Times bestseller, one of the most popular World War II era books of 2020. And now you've come back a year later with another astonishing novel that's inspired by a true story, In the Forest of Vanishing Stars. And I have to say, I'm simply in awe. So to start, can you just tell us what your latest book is about?
Sure. Thank you so much. So The Forest of Vanishing Stars, which is brand new this week, I'm so excited about it, is the story of a young woman who is kidnapped on her second birthday by this woman, this older woman named Jerusha, who feels that she's been called by the forest to take this girl and give her a different destiny than the one she's been given. So she renames her Yona, which, so that's the main character's name, Yona. And Yona is raised deep in the forest with all the survival skills she'll need. The ability to build a shelter in the winter, the ability to discern different herbs from each other and know which ones help and which ones heal, the ability to kill a man with her bare hands if that should become necessary, which it might become necessary, not to spoil anything. But so she has all these survival skills, but essentially no human relation skills. She doesn't know how to talk to other people because she's raised completely away from society. So in 1942, the old woman finally dies, leaving Yona, who's now in her early 20s, alone. And she's wandering the forest alone when she encounters an injured little girl. So this is 1942 in the forests of eastern Poland. And we know what was going on outside the woods, but Yona doesn't. So this is her first exposure to what's happening, which is that the Germans have come and they have put Jewish people into ghettos. So this little girl and her family have fled from a ghetto. Yona's life it connects with theirs, and it opens up this whole new world to her. She's forced to suddenly interact with people and learn sort of all these lessons from it. So there's tragedy, there's love, there's a search for identity. The group grows in size. There's also a portion of the book, not to give too much of a spoiler, but there's a portion of the book where her past kind of comes back to haunt her a little bit too. And then she's really forced to confront that idea of, who am I? Am I who I was born to? Am I who raised me? Or am I who I choose to be on my own? Which I think was kind of a central question to the book. So the story of Yona and the kidnapping, that part is fictional. But the stories of the refugees refugees in the forest were very much based on real life refugees during World War II, including probably the most well-known group of refugees, the Bielski Otriad, which was a group who you may know of if you've seen the 2008 movie Defiance, starring Daniel Craig and Liev Schreiber, which Daniel Craig and Liev Schreiber on their own are a great reason to watch a movie. But the film is great too. It's
Yeah.
about the true story of the Bielskis, who were these brothers in Eastern Poland who led a group of Jewish refugees in the forest that eventually grew to 1,200. It's an incredible true story. So the group in this novel is not that group. It's a much smaller group. It's not directly based on the Bielskis. But these stories of survival are based on sort of what they went through and how they lived off the land and how they fled from the Germans. And at the end, it's essentially a story of resilience and of fighting back and of reclaiming who you are by deciding who you want to be.
And you
Thank
really
you.
capture the spirit of the book. And what I like about it is that you're really seeing World War II from a completely different perspective, of the perspective of this woman who doesn't really know a lot about the outside world.
Yeah.
What is it that draws you to World War II?
You know, I was very inspired as a young reader, as I think many young readers are and were, by The Diary of Anne Frank. That was a book that I think really shaped my childhood and shaped my career as a writer. It was the book that showed me that books could change the world, words could change the world, which was an important part of my journey, I think. So I think that was the beginning of sort of my love affair with thinking about World War II and talking about World War II. Then later in my career, or later in my life, when I was working for People magazine, one of the really meaningful stories I did was with a man named Henry Landworth, who was a Holocaust survivor. And I think that reawakened all of it for me, just talking to him about what he had gone through and how it had shaped his life and changed who he became. The psychology of that was really interesting to me. So that kind of led to my first World War II book, which was in 2012. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I mean, I'm so drawn to that time period, maybe the way you're drawn, Fiona, to writing these just incredible sweeping books about New York. I mean, that's kind of, I know you found a love for that and a passion for that. I feel like that about World War II, because I feel like, as I'm sure is the case with New York and what you write about, there are so many stories that haven't been told yet, and so many stories that will resonate with people and inspire us and mean something to us today. And I hope this is one of those stories. It was for me. I mean, the historical part that went into it, and I just felt very honored to tell the story of these brave survivors in the forest. It just means a lot to me to be able to do this.
Oh, it's a wonderful, wonderful story, and so beautifully told. And so you wrote this during 2020, during the pandemic. Did that
Yes.
complicate your research at all? How did you do it?
Well, as you can imagine, since I wrote this book entirely in 2020, you're right. I, in fact, was not jetting off to Eastern Europe as I had planned to do. So yes, that did throw a wrench in the works. I began, as I do with every book, and I'm curious to talk to you about how you do this too, because your books are so well researched, and that research winds up so beautifully on the page. But I always begin with just mountains of reading, everything I can get my hands on. And so that was the case with this book, reading about survivors. And there is a lot that has been written about these survivors in the forest, but also reading about how to, like, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things Yona learns is how to kill a man with her bare hands. So I read books about how to kill people with your bare hands. So I know I'm on like a watch list somewhere. But so like that was a part of my research. Researching forest survival guides was a part of my research. Researching medicinal herbs was a part of it. But I would say the two things that, after kind of all those mountains of research that brought this story alive, one was that I had a chance to speak with the youngest Bielski brother, who I had no idea when I began writing this story. He lives in Florida, which is where I live. So like, what are the odds that we would be just a couple of hours from each other? But he's the only surviving Bielski brother. He was a teenager during the war. He's 94 this month. So he has quite a life to look back on. But I like to say that he kind of gave a beating heart to all the collection of knowledge and research and details I had accumulated. He was able to speak about his experience in the forest and things that I hadn't been able to find in the research. Like, I was really curious how exactly they celebrated holidays or honored Shabbat on Fridays, or if religion was a part of what of their lives out there. And one of the neat things he told me that I don't know, I just thought this was kind of cool, was that when they didn't have candles, they would light a piece of wood because it was that important to light those candles for those holidays. So, it was just little things like that that I was able to kind of thread in, but that really brought it alive for me. And then the other thing I really needed to wrap my head around and get a handle on was the forest itself, which I think is really kind of a character in this novel. Just like, again, Fiona, the New York is a character in yours. The buildings you write about are characters, and you need so much to bring that alive. So for me, one of the I mean, truly the key to completing this book, from a continent away, was that I was able to connect with a man named Vadim Sidorich, who is a forest guide who leads ecotourism tours into the Nalibaki forest, which is the forest at the heart of this novel. He also has a PhD. He's written a huge, super thick book about the flora, the fauna, and the human history of the forest. So I used his book as a resource, but then I went from the pages to connecting directly with him. Um, and he became my source for every single question I had. So if I needed to know, okay, it's September and they've been walking for 4 days and they're in this swampy area and they need to eat, what would they eat? And he would give me a list of the animals that would have been in that particular area of the forest. He would tell me the mushrooms that were in that area, the ones that were poisonous, the ones that weren't. If I needed to know how somebody would find a shelter, he would go into the woods and show me himself in various types of shelters that somebody could find in that specific portion of the woods. I mean, he was like a gift from God. And so, although I regret not being able to travel there myself, I feel like virtually Vadim took me there in like every conceivable way. And then having Aaron Bielski to talk to kind of wrapped it all up in a bow. So it was a really just incredible research experience for me. It was a really interesting, I don't know, interesting one to tackle from a research perspective.
What a wonderful pair of resources. And also in the book,
Yeah.
you also have, things like if you get sick, if you have a cut, you have all these kind of naturopathic ways of taking care of yourself. Was that a whole other level of study for you?
I not only read books about medicinal herbs and their uses, but also about old Polish traditions of like herbal medicine, like and witchcraft and the things that went with that. But everything also, Vadim was also incredibly helpful with that, because everything I found out in those books, I had to make sure grew in that area of the forest, so it was accurate. So it wasn't just like, okay, I know this herb does this. I would say 50% of what I sent him, he'd say like, nope, that's only in the northern part of the forest, and the part you're talking about is in the, so you can imagine, like, my head almost exploded with the details. Like, there's just not enough room up here for all of it, but I think I got it all right.
And that's one of those things that I think, you want to get that right, because
Yeah.
you want to be true to what these people went through and honor them in that way. So
That's so true. And you must feel like that too. Do you feel like that with your books? Like, when you're writing historical fiction, you almost dishonor the memory of the real people who walked that path, even if you get a medicinal herb wrong, right? Do you feel like that too?
yes, I agree. I think I become hyper aware of anything that doesn't quite connect. And
Yeah.
often, sometimes you might explain it in the author's note that you needed to change the date or do something like that,
Yes.
but
Yes.
it's hard for me to do that.
Yeah, me too. And then that, like, if you get one little thing wrong, it's
Mhm.
going to throw off the book for somebody, because
Mhm.
if you come across something, even if it's a tiny little throwaway line like that, but if it's incorrect and it's incorrect, I think it makes
Mhm.
it harder to trust the rest of the book, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
I think you're exactly right there.
Yeah.
And your prior books, a lot of them were set in France, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what drew you to Poland for this one?
That is a great question that I don't have a great answer to. It is a departure for me. I think if I'm known for anything, it's probably for writing about World War II France. So this is a little bit of a disruption in the routine. Rest assured, I'm returning to World War II France. But you're right. It would be like you writing about Chicago. Like, what am I doing? Um, Maybe you've written about Chicago. I don't know. I identify you with New York. But I think I've always been inspired by the story of the Bielskis, as I mentioned. I think it's such an important story to know, not just for the historical element of it and knowing what they did, but also for the idea that we all, in tough times, it is possible to try to save ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, I just, what they did was so incredible. And, it wasn't just survival, it was seeking to help other people survive too. I mean, Aaron Bielski's job, the one I talked to, his job was to go into the ghettos and bring people out, and not just people who could help fight back, but children and elderly people and people who wouldn't survive. Like, they knew that people like that would not survive in the ghettos, and so they snuck into the ghettos and brought them out. It's so interesting. So that heart of the story has always been interesting, but this was one of those ones that I feel like came to me um, almost whole. Like, the story idea was just, I don't know if that's happened to you before, but I had to put a lot of research into it, but the bare bones were there. And it wasn't until I was about midway through writing the novel that my brother shared our ancestry.com research results with me. And I had always known that my dad's side of the family, which is my Jewish side of the family, my mom's side is Catholic, and I grew up Catholic. But my dad's side of the family is Jewish. And I had always thought they were from Germany, Austria, Hungary. Those were kind of the countries I'd heard. I never knew that much about it. But my brother sent me our ancestry.com family tree. And it turned out that the actual Harmels from my family, who came to this country 50 years before World War II, were from Eastern Poland. They were from Poland. They were from the area I was writing about. And in fact, looking through those cool ancestry records you can find, I saw a record of my great great grandmother, Rosie Harmel, who spoke Yiddish. That was her first language. It had it on the census forms. But you could see a record of her boarding a ship to go to France, or to go to Europe in 1933, and coming back in 1933 when she was 69 years old. So she must have, I can only imagine she must have gone back to visit family. I mean, why else would you travel across the ocean on an ocean liner in 1933, right? So she was there 6 years before the war, and she died in 1941. But I have to imagine she died knowing what was happening to her former homeland, to these people she'd just seen, 7 years earlier, or 8 years earlier, and must have, I don't know. I'm not a big, like, oh, like it was meant to be, but like,
Woo
is
woo, yeah.
right. But isn't there a little part of that that's like, why on earth was I writing about this family, this piece of my own family history that I didn't know about at all? I mean, like, it's a little weird, but so I think that's why I was drawn to reading this
It's
novel.
in your DNA. I think there's
It
something
is.
to it. The DNA footprint is in there.
I think so too. And it's been really cool because I'm not that connected to that side of the family, or to the history on that side of the family. And even over the last few years of writing, it's awakened a lot of that in me, this connection to my past, because it's also, I think I mentioned my mom's side of the family is Irish, but it's from my dad's side that I have a French connection too. My grandmother used to live, my great grandmother used to live a couple blocks away from where I lived in Paris, which I never knew when I lived in Paris. So it's like I've spent the last 20 years apparently following, unknowingly, in these footsteps that have been embedded in my DNA all along. Isn't that weird?
It was meant to be, clearly
Yeah,
meant to be.
exactly.
And so what do you think the message of the novel is? And was it something you intended from the start, or did it change as you were working on the book?
I don't think I ever really start with a message, but or at least consciously. So part of it is kind of where the story takes me. The author Jane Ann Krentz, who writes romance novels, and she said just in passing, all of us have one story to tell. I'm misquoting her, but something along the lines of, all of us have one story to tell. We just tell it different ways. And when she said that, I thought, that's not true. Like, I've told a million different stories and they're all totally different. But I started thinking about it and I was like, nope, they all have kind of the same underlying theme, which is the idea of ordinary people can rise up to do extraordinary things. And if the people in our books can do that, if the real people during World War II can do that, we can too, which I think is an inspiring message that is very relevant for today.
That gives me the chills, by the way.
Oh, that's awesome. I also think that at the heart of this book, aside from the idea of finding light in the darkness, and as Aaron Bielski might say, lighting a piece of wood if you can't find a candle, you can always find light in the darkness. I think it's the idea of, I think we touched on this earlier about identity, and I think that was kind of a theme that runs throughout. Who determines your identity? Is it what's in your blood? Which we just talked about that, and maybe it is a little bit what's in your blood. But are you culpable for the things that your ancestors have done, or are you born fresh and you can start anew and build your own life? And then are you who you were raised to be, or are you who you choose to become? So I think that question of identity kind of runs throughout also. So Fiona, we're both really extreme researchers, I think. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, how you know when you've done enough research to start your story? We talked a little bit about my research, but I'm kind of curious about your process too.
Yeah, it's similar where I'm reading a lot, I'm interviewing a lot of people who are experts in the field. And then for me, I just reach a tipping point where I feel like, okay, I have the time period and the characters and some ideas for the plot under my belt, and I start thinking about how I'd write a scene, and that's when I know it's time to figure out that outline and start the first draft. What about you? What is your tipping point? When do you know?
I think I do as much research as I can get my hands on as far as reading. And then I begin drafting the outline. And it's while I'm drafting the outline that I start filling in some of the blanks. And that's when I start calling people who I feel like I need to talk to kind of nail down those details. Because I kind of want to know what my way is into the story before I start, I shouldn't say wasting people's time, but spending people's time. Because I don't want to take hours of somebody's time and then be like, oh, that plot line didn't really work. I'd rather kind of narrow it down to what I need. How do you avoid putting too much in? Because I think you and I both end up with just mountains and mountains of research.
It's so tricky because especially, like the forest is a character in your book and you want to bring a three-dimensional forest out there.
Yes.
I have a building that my readers often are familiar with, and so I want to bring out surprising aspects of its history and of its infrastructure into the book so that people are surprised and are learning something they might not know otherwise. And so I'm looking for things that surprise me all the time. So the fact that there was an apartment in the library helped, and then it's a matter of describing things to a point and then moving through the plot. Because I also love books, and this is what you do so well, with a really interesting plot that has me going along because of the tension. And so that, that to me has to supersede the details of what was in the room.
That is such a good way to put it. And I love that about your books too. I feel like you give us enough to build the world and to see the world clearly, to see the places clearly. You have dialogue that's very appropriate for its time. You have detail. I mean, you color that package in so beautifully, but you don't dwell too much. Like you give us exactly what we need, and then we're kind of off to the races with the story happening. And that's what keeps you turning the pages, not reading, 20 pages about the color of the table in the middle of the library, although you probably could give us that, but it's like, as a writer, you almost have to quiet that researcher within you and say like, okay, simmer down. Like, I know you know it, but you don't have to put it on the page, right?
Yes, exactly. You have to subdue that tendency to show off everything that you've learned. And I'm curious for you, you create these fictional characters that are laid over a factual backdrop.
Yeah.
And I do the same thing.
Yeah.
What makes you do it that way?
Because I have such admiration for people like, for example, Marie Benedict, right? Like Marie Benedict writes these or Stephanie Dre, like they both do these incredible stories about real life women, and they bring them back to life in a way that you're like, were you there? Like, how do you know what this person, it's amazing. They're incredible at that. I that terrifies me. Like for me, I feel like I like to have the latitude to let this story go where it needs to. And I think it's just a different type of writing. I think we're all putting the puzzle pieces together differently. So I like having the backdrop and the historical facts and the timeline locked in. Like that's, unchangeable unless you mention in the author note I had to adjust this date for whatever reason, but that's locked. And then once I have that locked in, I like having the ability to kind of play within that world. But I have such respect for what they do. I mean, I read their books and I feel like a little fear pounding in my heart because I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's so brave and they're so good at it.
I think it's similar in that I'm jealous of them in that they have the plot laid out. They can't
Yes.
deviate. They can't have a character marry someone who they didn't marry.
Yeah.
You can't invent things. You have a
Yeah.
plot, you have a
Yes.
life, and that's what you're writing about. And they
Yeah,
pick people who have had amazing lives,
they do.
like Agatha Christie, and it's
Yes.
wonderful.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I just like the freedom. I love a good
Yeah.
plot twist in a book. I love a part where you kind of have to stop and turn the page and go back and go, oh, I had
Yes.
no idea. And that tends to happen rarely in real life. And so that's why I use fictional characters so that I can
Yes.
really play with the reader's expectations and surprise them.
That's such a good point. That was better put than what I said. I
Yeah.
think I do the same, and I think it's the difference between being the one to lead the plot, and then or like the other decision is letting the plot lead you, but
Yeah.
doing amazing things without that frameworks, within that framework that's already in place. It's such an incredible skill.
And what about you? What are you working on now? Or,
Oh
or
my
can you
gosh.
talk about it yet?
It is a return to World War II France, and it is about three mothers, the war, Paris, um, the dropping of bombs on a building that they shouldn't be dropped on,
Mhm.
and a daughter who disappears. And then we pick up in your city, Fiona, in New York in the 1950s, for a continuation of the story. So that is, and I'm not being cagey about it. I just haven't really put all the pieces together yet. So I'm like,
I
this is happening, and that's how they're all fitting together.
love it. I love the concept. And let me know when you come up to New York to do research, and we shall have a glass of
I
wine or three.
I love it. Well, this has been so fun, Fiona. It has been such a pleasure talking with you today. And I know you are such a favorite at in St. Louis.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here, and I'm just am so excited for your book to be
Well,
out in
thank
the world.
you. Thank you so much, Fiona, for doing this with me, and thanks to everyone out there. All right, so this is a very, very brief little bit of chapter one. Jerusha, the crazy woman I mentioned, or perhaps not crazy, who knows? She's been called by the forest, or so she believes, to take this little girl who begins life as Inga in Berlin. So she's standing on a street corner in Berlin, and she's about to take her. So that's kind of where we're picking up. So Jerusha, she didn't want a child. She never had. Perhaps that was why it had taken her so long to act. But nature makes no mistakes, and now, as the sky filled with a cloud of silent blackbirds over the twinkling city, she knew the time had come. It was easy to climb up the ladder of the modern building's fire escape. Easier still to push open the Utener's unlatched window and slip quietly inside. The child was awake, silently watching. Her extraordinary eyes, one twilight blue and one forest green, glimmering in the darkness. Her hair was black as night, her lips the startling red of corn poppies. I have come for you, Jerusha whispered in Yiddish, a language the girl would not yet know. She was startled to realize that her heart was racing. She didn't expect a reply, but the child's lips parted, and she reached out her left hand, palm upturned, the dove-shaped birthmark shimmering in the darkness. She said something soft, something that a lesser person would have dismissed as the meaningless babble of a little girl. But to Jerusha, it was unmistakable. Du sent ihr, said the girl in Yiddish. It is you. Jo, du bin ich, Jerusha agreed. And with that, she picked up the baby, who didn't cry out, and tucking her close against the brittle curves of her body, climbed out the window and shimmied down the iron rail, her feet hitting the sidewalk without a sound. From the folds of Jerusha's cloak, the baby watched soundlessly, her mismatched ocean eyes round, as Berlin vanished behind them and the forest to the north swallowed them whole.